cultural and creative industries is very important to Australia currently, and from the 2013 data, the cultural and creative industries contributes currently about $90.2 billion to our annual GDP. Of that, about $3.5 billion of that is currently exported and is certainly growing. The industry is very important to the Australian economy as it currently employs 432,000 people, and of those creative persons that are currently employed across the broad sector, most of them are freelancers, about 80%, and most of those businesses turn over under $200,000 a year. So what does the cultural and creative arts sector look like? Well, it's certainly a very dynamic sector, and it's certainly a sector that covers quite a lot of various genres or art spaces. So it spans art, design, culture, screen. It's very diverse. It includes fashion, graphic design, filmmaking, architecture, printmaking, advertising, music, comedy, and craft as well. As I mentioned earlier, the sector has very good employment numbers, and if you look at the current sector for 2014, as you can see there's a couple of key sectors in which the employment categories are. So radio broadcasting contributes to approximately 8%, and we have museums and museum operations at 8% also, cultural libraries at about 11%, TV broadcasting at 13%, and creative and performing arts industries is the biggest at 33%, and also we have motion picture and video activities at 22%. So you can certainly see there that over 50% of the sector currently is very much in that video digital space, and is certainly growing. The cultural and creative industry, based on 2014 employment data, as you can see there, on the graph behind me, you can certainly see that there is a gender split. It is fairly equal, and there's a number of categories there in which persons are employed. In terms of music professions, libraries, advertising, drawing, painting, dancers, sculptors. It is a very broad sector, and one that continues to grow. The enrolments for CUA and CUS and for our training packages, the enrolments have remained steady over the last couple of years. They have continued to grow, and that trend would certainly appear to be the case for the next couple of years. As you can see on the graph behind me, CUV has probably the largest number of enrolments, but in broad terms, the cultural and creative portfolio has approximately 62,000 enrolments nationally, and out of those enrolments, approximately 1 in 4 is vetting schools. So 1 in 4 enrolments is in vocational education and training in a high school environment, and we've certainly seen that continue to grow. Most of the vetting schools programs are in the music space and also in the graphic design space as well. If you actually just break down the packages in 2013 in terms of the enrolments, you can certainly see there that CUV is certainly the largest, followed by the other ones being CUS, which is our music, CUL, which is library and museums, followed by CUA, which is dance, live performance and technical production services, and we also have CUF, which is screen and media at 23%. So what does today's creative practitioner look like? If you ask this question to many different creative practitioners, you will get many and varied answers. The research that IPSA has done through its 2014 and 2015 e-scans, there's a very recurring theme that continues to appear, and that is that today's creative practitioner is multimodal. They are multidisciplinary. So what does that exactly mean? What that means is that in terms of their average working week, they will have a number of different jobs. As we mentioned earlier, over 80% of them work freelance, and so their typical week could be an artist in residence. They may be doing that for 1 or 2 days a week. They then may also be a sessional teacher at a high school or a vocation education training or TAFE environment. They may also do some commissioning work. They may also even do some pro bono work. So the majority of the creative practitioners, they have a number of jobs that equal the sum or the part of full-time employment. So by unpacking that further, they need to have agile and flexible skills, and they need to be able to move rapidly to the current changes that are happening within the cultural and creative arts sector. And we know that that's being driven by technology, and technology and collaboration continues to drive that. So they are the kind of skills that today's creative practitioner needs. They need to be flexible, agile, and also respond to a rapid and changing environment. So if we look at the workforce development challenges, there are 6 workforce development challenges that have come out of IPSA's research that we've done in the 2015 eScan, and there are 6 key themes, as you can see on the slides behind me. So the first key theme is business development skills. The second key theme is harnessing technology. The third theme is operating new and emerging markets. And the fourth one is building collaborative business relationships and networks. And we also have managing changes to work. And we also have operating as a freelancer and managing a small business. And certainly the sixth theme is the one that we've had a lot of feedback around, that today's creative practitioner needs to have the skills not only to do their creative practice, their creative craft, whether that be dance, sculpting, filmmaking, graphic design, ceramics, music for performance, whatever their creative craft happens to be, and there are many more, they need to also have those business skills as well. So we're just going to unpack a little bit further the first key theme, and the first key theme is business development skills. And so from our research, it's certainly become clear that these are the critical skills, not only of now, but of the future of what today's creative practitioner needs. So firstly, they need entrepreneurial skills. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means being entrepreneurial in spirit, entrepreneurial in finding those new business opportunities, those collaborative opportunities to work with your peers, to work with colleagues in the similar creative space that you're in, or in a similar discipline, and actually be entrepreneurial in seeking those opportunities to build on your practice and also build your revenue and income opportunities. Then the next critical skill feature in this business development is actually how to do micro business management. So as we've mentioned earlier, over 80% of these businesses are freelance. They turn over under $200,000 per annum. So what does that mean? Well, it's a micro business. So how do you manage your micro business? What are you responsible for? What's your brand? So having those micro business management skills. You know, why do I need to do GST? Why do I need to have an ABN number? Why do I need to be compliant? What happens if I employ someone as a contractor as opposed to employing them as a staff-on employee? So that's the micro business management skills that we've certainly seen that are coming through. Then packing the third one is the understanding of alternate funding mechanisms. And that space is changing really, really quickly. And so unpacking that further, what does it mean? Well, it means being able to find those funding opportunities that you need for your project, whether that be crowdfunding, whether that be philanthropy funding through various philanthropy organisations and foundations, whether that be with joint ventures, whether that be funding through royalties. You know, how do you find that funding mechanism that you need to have the money that you need to do your next creative project? So we've certainly seen that's certainly growing, and also how do you manage stakeholders to get them engaged, to get that funding? There's quite a skill to working with, you know, partners to get your funding. So how do you actually unpack and do that? And then the fourth key theme is contract law, management law, and content protection and content production. So we certainly now know with the digital age, with the likes of Facebook, Twitter, Bligger, Blogger, Zigger, and everything else that's out there, everyone can now create digital content, and everyone is a brand. So how do you manage your digital content? If you put something inappropriately in the digital content space, what are the consequences? So this whole digital content space is changing really quickly, and it's certainly changing around the various laws, and you need to be aware of that. So in terms of the first key theme around business development skills, just recapping, the critical skills are entrepreneurial skills, micro business management, understanding of alternate funding mechanisms, and also contract law. The second key theme is around harnessing technology. So as you can see on the slides, we're just going to unpack that a little bit further and talk about what does that exactly look like. So the first one is around digital literacy, and we're certainly seeing that there is a lot of great changes happening in digital literacy, but today's creative practitioner needs to be digital literate. And so they need to be able to harness and work with technology. They need to be able to work with the various Android and non-Android devices, and also be able to work virtually as well. And so there's a real big shift in that space, and there's also a real big shift in that space in terms of the new generation of learners that are coming through. So the new generation of learners coming through are referred to as the Apple generation. They're effectively currently aged between 1 and about 18. And so the new Apple generation of learners can program equipment, they can program Androids, various things, and they are very, very digital literate. So these are the sort of skills in terms of that digital literacy. The second key theme is around managing social media systems and applications. So how do you manage your social media? What does that look like? And how do you also manage those applications? And so this key theme has been coming through over the last 1 to 2 years of the consultations that IPSA has done. And as part of IPSA addressing the needs of industry and various stakeholders, we have developed some units of competency around social media and digitising media for engagement. Also, unpacking that a little bit further is that today's younger creative practitioner, and what I mean by that is today's younger creative practitioner that is, let's say, under the age of 25, and I'm certainly not being ageist or anything derogatory in that space, but they need to understand what are the implications of the consequences of what you put on social media, because social media creates your digital footprint, and everyone is now a brand. So once you create your digital footprint, whether it be in Facebook or whether it be in LinkedIn, you have then created your brand. So that's in terms of managing the social media systems and applications. They need to be able to have those skills and be able to manage that in a really positive space. The next key skill is collaboration. Collaboration, consensus, creativity, they are all intertwined, and they really need to have those skills to be able to collaborate, especially when you align that with technology and the work that is very much virtual. So how do you collaborate virtually? How do you collaborate with creative practitioners that are in your creative discipline, let's say it be photography, or how do you collaborate with creative practitioners that aren't in your chosen discipline of photography, for example, but maybe ceramics or visual arts or visual merchandising. So they are the skills that they need to also develop around this whole collaboration space. The other thing that is a really interesting skill is juxtaposing your art practice with technology. So how do you bring them together, but then bring them apart without losing the creative integrity of the creativity product that you're designing, whether it be photography, art, whatever it happens to be. So there's this real juxtaposition and wrestling of bringing creativity together with also technology, and we're seeing a lot of that as well. So you need to be able to use the latest technologies and skills to bring out your creative product, but also it depends what your creative product or discipline is, because sometimes technology may enhance your creative design or outcome, and sometimes it may not. So it's about being able to really unpack that and look at what your creative discipline is. Diagnostic skills. Diagnostic skills really relates to being able to self-manage IT at a really basic level. So in this whole virtual world of technology and working remotely and collaboratively, how do you sync your iPad to your iPhone, to your computer, and just those basic diagnostic skills. And then understanding communication and design principles that underpin quality digital output. So really understanding how to use technology, but to get better digital output as well, and how to use those devices, and understanding how that works. We're now going to move on to the third key theme, and that is entering and operating in new and emerging markets. And so yet again, entrepreneurial skills comes back up, so we've already mentioned that, so I won't go over that. But also looking at customer engagement. So in the creative space, who are your customers? How do you engage with them? How do you ensure that your customers like either the products or services that you're providing? Whether that be photography services or graphic design or music or dance. How do you engage with your customers, and how do you empower your customers to become your advocacy, to speak proudly and fondly of the service or the product that you provide, and then be part of your referral system. So really building that customer advocacy skills and networking skills as well. And then also distribution and exporting. That is a really critical area. As we mentioned earlier at the start of this presentation, currently in Australia in 2014, we exported $3.2 billion of creative products and services offshore. And that's starting to certainly grow, and Australia does hold its own internationally in the cultural and creative space. So what creative products do you have that you can export offshore? And there's one that I'll talk a little bit later in this presentation, which is a really great story about how you can actually do that. And then also the skill of storytelling. So in cultural and creative arts, it is about telling the story. It is about engaging with your audience. It's also about writing. It's about sound. It's about vision. It's about movement. So also having those skills to tell a story. Every creative piece tells some form of a story. So, having the skills to look at whatever the creative piece is, because it does tell a story. Branding and marketing, as we've mentioned earlier, having those skills about how to manage your brand and how to manage your marketing, because as we mentioned earlier, everyone is a brand, and so you really need to know how do you manage your brand and how does that work. And then another growing skill that you need is working around creative and pop-up art installations and opportunities, and also managing public art as well. We're seeing a lot more public art, and we're certainly seeing public art grow, and we're certainly seeing a lot more of pop-up art installations growing right around the country. So you're seeing that in all states and territories, and also regional centres as well. So, how do you work with your local regional community if you wish to do a pop-up art installation or be a part of that? The next key critical theme is establishing global connections. So it comes back to this whole global space, and also the critical skills are social media utilisation strategies. So how can you use social media to drive what it is your business strategy, whether that be to increase your brand awareness, increase sales, whatever that happens to be. So these are some of the critical skills that you need. And then you also have networking as well. So developing the skill of not only networking with your peers in your creative discipline, but also networking with your peers in other disciplines that align with your overall creative sector as well. So really building those networking opportunities. And we're already starting to see that in a number of training providers with their advanced diploma programs, where they have their advanced diploma of graphic design students working alongside their advanced diploma of visual arts students, and also their music students, and also their screen and media students. So, bringing together end-of-year projects, student exhibitions. We're seeing a lot more of that as well, and that's a really critical skill for the graduates or soon-to-be graduates to develop that networking skill, because once they graduate, they will need to use those other creative practices as part of their business skills moving forward. Collaborating over distance. So with virtualisation now, how do you collaborate over a distance? How do you engage and collaborate, and also be able to get that meaningful exchange, dialogue, collaborative ideas without doing it face to face? So really developing that skill. And as I mentioned earlier, there's an example I'll talk on a little bit later, which does exactly that and does it really well. Negotiating. Negotiating is a really critical skill. So how do you negotiate? How do you manage conflict? How do you negotiate with your client? And we've also added into our training package within BSB, but we've also included in the CUA qualifications at the diploma and the advanced diploma, which is manage the client account. So how do you manage your client in the creative space? That's one of the most key critical things, is how do you manage your client? How do you understand your client's brief? What is it that your client wants from what you're producing or making for them? And making sure that you can unpack that and deliver what the client wants. And then also cultural competency. This is really, really a critical skill that you really need to develop and build on in this globalisation and virtual space. So what is cultural competency? What does it look like? Well, it's about understanding different cultures that you're actually maybe doing business with, and also understanding the nuances of that particular culture, the nuances of that culture, and also how they may do business, the etiquettes they may have within their country, the etiquettes they may bring over when they come into our country to do business. So understanding, cultural competency of countries that you may be doing work or projects with, and being respectful and really building that cultural knowledge. The next key critical skill, which we're going to unpack a little bit further, is building collaborative business relationships. And as you can see, this theme has been touched on earlier in the presentation. So broad-based project management skills. This is really, really critical because these are the skills that we've certainly had a lot of feedback from industry that graduates need to be able to know how to manage a project virtually, manage a project remotely, and also to manage a project with a lot of collaborative participants that may be in all sorts of different creative spaces to bring a particular project together. So broad-based project management skills and being able to manage a project to make sure that it happens on time and meets the outcomes is a really critical skill. And then communication, negotiation and mediation skills, that's come up again as a really critical skill. So being able to communicate effectively, engagingly, communicate that provides inspiration, excitement, really developing on that communication skill. And as we mentioned in a few slides previous, that whole storytelling. So communication and storytelling starts to come back together. So, how do you communicate with your client, your staff, your colleagues, your team, other stakeholders to really do that whole storytelling skill. And then also being able to mediate as well. So mediation, working with difficult clients. Certainly in the creative space, you will at some point have difficult clients. So how do you work with them? How do you negotiate with them? And how do you really develop those skills? And then we've also covered off accessing alternate funding mechanisms, which we've spoken about previously, and then also relationship management skills. Managing changes to work. This is probably one of the biggest changes that's happened to the creative sector because of technology. Probably over the last 5 to 10 years, this has really moved really, really quickly. So one of the key critical things for today's modern creative practitioner is really around self-management skills. So being able to, when we unpack that further, what does it mean? It means being able to manage their time, manage their workload, manage their commitments outside of their professional practice, and also being able to ensure that they meet the various requirements they have with clients and also their other stakeholders. So having a really good, and also aligns back with the previous slides around project management, so really bringing those nuances together. And then also the capacity to move to different environments and contexts, not only globally but regionally. And so what that means is with the whole creative space morphing and moving really rapidly with various events and projects and also various funding mechanisms, that the creative sector, as we mentioned in a couple of previous slides, today's creative practitioner needs to be flexible, agile, and be able to move with change really quickly. So this picks up on that theme that they need to be able to have the capacity to move to where the work is, and that may mean a physical move, that may just mean working virtually differently. So if you're, for example, doing a co-collaboration piece with some stakeholders outside of Australia, and let's use the example you may be doing with stakeholders that are in Singapore and Dubai. Singapore's 3 hours behind, Dubai is 9 hours behind. So you need to be able to have that flexibility to not only work internationally, but adjust your work time. So you may not start work till 2 in the afternoon because that aligns with their particular time zones. I certainly know when I worked with Emirates, that's what we would do. We would start later in the day because they were 9 hours behind to align with the work we would do for them. So it's really having that context, that globalisation, that capacity to move and to be really flexible and agile. And as we've mentioned previously, broad project management skills keeps coming up as a very continuous theme. This is the business that I was talking about that just really unpacks the whole game changer. And this is quite phenomenal. So what we've seen in the cultural and creative arts sector in probably the last 2 to 3 years, and it's become really pronounced certainly in the last 2 to 3 years, is this whole virtualization, this total portability and global collaboration. And so there's probably no better example of it than freelancer.com. So Freelancer.com is an Australian-based company. It's been set up for 10 years. It's on the ASX, so it's on the Australian Stock Exchange. It has market cap of close to 800 million. But the great thing that this global freelancing organisation or company is, it brings clients and freelancers together virtually, regardless of what you do and regardless of where you live. So you can certainly see in terms of that, we're talking about global freelancing. We've got estimated 3.7 million people in Australia undertook some form of freelancing work in 2014. And it's approximately $51 million per annum. So when you unpack that further, where I'm going with this global freelancing is, if you look at the freelancer.com, they're in 247 countries. They've had over 6.5 million projects completed this year. And and it's not just freelance projects for graphic design, which is what you would traditionally think of, but it's also IT, it's strategy, it's marketing, it's all sorts of varying freelancing projects. And so what this global website, freelancer.com, does is, as a freelancer, you register and you put up your portfolio, and then clients go in and put up their projects. And there's a lot of blue chip clients that have been doing that, such as Coca-Cola, such as GM out of America. And so they put up the projects that they have, and they put up a brief and a price that they are prepared to pay. And then freelancers actually log on and submit their price. The client then chooses which freelancer they wish to work with, and once the client's happy with it, the client then pays the fee. Now, the great thing about globalfreelancer.com is it's already in 247 countries, so you can be in Australia putting up your brief, and you could choose a graphic designer from Russia, Kazakhstan, Istanbul, the Czech Republic. It doesn't really matter. And the freelancer that's actually doing the work and completing the work, they get paid in their currency, and you pay for the job in your currency. So it really makes that whole portability. And so if you do get a chance, certainly have a look at freelancer.com, because it really has a really good digital demonstration of where this whole creative space is going in terms of this whole globalization. It is really changing by the day. And there are other providers out there, not just freelancer.com. There's a couple of other ones as well, but it's a real game changer, and it's changing really quickly. And it just highlights in a really good visual context the sort of skills that today's creative practitioners going to need. And one of the great examples on Global Freelancer is you've got junior graphic designers in Bangladesh that are now actually able to earn money to actually live. So it also has a lot of social empowering great stuff in terms of those developing countries as well. So really worth having a look at. So that concludes my presentation for cultural and creative arts, and I apologise that I have moved a little bit quicker than what I was planning. Unless there's any questions from anyone that we have in the room or for anyone that we have online. We'll just wait a few moments. That's okay, I'll just have a glass of water. It's all good. Okay, well, if you do have any questions at some point in time, please feel free to send me an email. It's Simon, so it's SIMON, .COCHAUD at ibsa.org.au. Or alternately, if you just type in IBSA, ibsa.org.au, and click on staff, you can find all of our staff to make contact with us. So once again, thanks for your time. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to send us an email. We'd be most happy to help you, and hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks for your time.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.